Hi you guys. Alright, so today's video I wanted to share my thoughts on the books I have read so far in the month of September. As you may know me, for some of you who've been with me, when it comes to my wrap up, I can talk about these books in such details that it makes the video so long. So in order to avoid that, not that you guys mind, right? I thought I would just talk about the books I've read so far so that when it comes to my wrap up, it's a bit short because I will simply briefly go over the books and have you come back here to watch this video where I am going to thoroughly talk about these books. So without further ado, sit tight, don't go anywhere because I'm gonna let you go eventually. Alright, Jambo, Karibu, welcome to my channel. My name is Chilanda and this is Library Without Borders. So, before I even get into the gist of this book, how are you doing? It's fall, officially. It's, I think, no, on the 23rd, and I'm filming this on the 21st. So it's gonna be fall officially in 2 days. But we've enjoyed some good weather, y'all. Like, my kids were in shorts, tank top, all week, so it was nice outside. I was like, if fall could be like that, it'd be great. But anyways, y'all, let's just get into it. The first book I want to talk to you about is Drinking from Graveyard Well, stories told by Yvette Lisan-Lovu. And this book was recommended to me by Diruxel, and it's pretty short. I actually enjoyed the story. Now, I'm not going to talk to you guys about all the stories, but I was reading this at night and I was like, oh my god, like I was like, what? It had the first story started like with a ghost story, like she's floating and looking over at the village and her body and how it's been prepared for burial. So I was like, oh my god, I can't believe I'm reading this. But then I thought, why didn't I keep this book for Halloween? Because it was so perfect. Even in death I am, since we are, and since we are, therefore I am. Death is not the end, it is the beginning of another long journey. I like that. There were some things I highlighted because sometimes when I hear these stories from Motherland, they're always so full of wisdom, wise sayings, and I like to highlight those things. But anyways, essentially, like I said, it's just a selection of multiple stories that are from like South Africa, Zimbabwe. And I just want to mention that first story. As I said, it's this woman, she's dead and she's floating and she's looking at her village and how people are basically getting her body prepared. And the way she's talking about it, it's not like you're wailing or she's very sad. She's just explaining it matter of fact, how she died, what happened, and she explained the reason why she's floating. I guess she's wanting to make sure that her body's prepared correctly, and at the same time, while she's looking at her body being prepared for burial, she meets another spirit, and that other spirit, something happened to her that is very tragic, and it looks like due to the way she died, it might be problematic for her to basically sort of move on. You know what I mean? So it's stories like that. There was another story where it was this girl and this guy, and they have to give one sense in order to gain another. Like this guy lost his sight, but then he gains something back. You know what I mean? So it is just fantastical stories like that, and it had, like, I was laughing. There were a little bit of comedy to the storytelling. The characters were endearing. They were original story, like I said, with a little bit of African folklore. So I recommend this book for if you want to read it more in October. So definitely, it's very short. It's a cute book to have to diversify your own TBR. You get to hear a little bit of ghost stories, but with the African tone to it, right? So I recommend. And this book, I'm gonna put it at a 3.75. And in fact, I was thinking I might have to rethink this whole rating, because I watched some videos where people were actually talking about the advantages of rating a book versus not rating a book. And as I'm watching those videos being made about rating books or not rating them and the reasons given, I'm thinking I may have to rethink also if I want to continue rating books, or if I just want to tell you guys to read it. I recommend, or I don't recommend, but still, if you want to, you are more than welcome to do it, right? I'm thinking about it, but it's a 3.75 out of 5 for me. And then I read To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monique Blackgoose. So obviously this story is an indigenous story, and I decided to listen to it because, again, there were some, I guess the words, what I'm gonna say about the narrator is that I think there's only one narrator, because I could tell the accents or the different, when she was trying to make the male voice versus the female voice and the main character's voice, I felt like it was made by the same person, so that could be sort of a turn off. But apart from that, she did a good job in narrating the story. So this story is about Anakus and Kasakwa. Okay, the Nampashwe. Nampashwe is the people of this small island. On that small island, what happens is that one day Anakus just kind of goes and is walking and gets close to a mountain, and there's an egg that, what is it? What does it, when an egg, what's the word? When the egg opens? What's the word? Okay, my husband will put the word there. But then there's a dragon, and that dragon's name is Kasakwa. And Kasakwa automatically bonds with Anakus. There's no dragons that have been seen on the island for years, I think, not centuries, for years. So when she tells her villagers, the village, the people of the village are like, whoa, wow, okay. And there's a whole reunion or meeting that's called, and things are discussed. Now what happens is that, unfortunately, that dragon needs to be trained, because if not trained, y'all know it could get dangerous. So now she has to go to a school where they train dragon, and that's like where they help shape the breath of a dragon. Unfortunately, that school is on English territory. And the thing with this book is that it's very wordy. There was a lot of explanation. At some point, she talks about comportement. In French, c'est comportement. So she talks about when she gets to the school and she's meeting all these English people, she is made aware of English manners, English mannerism, English comportment, English society. And it's very detailed in the English lifestyle, to the point where she feels inadequate, right? She feels inadequate, and she is reminded not only by the school teachers, by the colleagues of that school. She does make a few friends who are siding with her. What I found interesting, apart from all of those things that I just mentioned, is that at some point she meets this girl called Liberty, and there is mention of slavery, but in a different, she names it something else, it's not quite slavery. And she does make a friend of this black girl, and her name is Liberty. Liberty works at that school, but she does like manual work, like I think like seamstress or things like that. At some point, she helps Anakus with her dressing. I think she needs to prepare for an event at the school, and Liberty is helping her, and something sparkles between the two girls. And what she explains is that in their tradition, in their indigenous tradition, in the Nampashwe tradition, it is absolutely normal for a girl to date a boy and a girl, and even marry the two. It's absolutely normal. I was like, oh, okay, is this just fiction or is this real? Is this real? But I thought it was different. There's no action throughout the book until the very end. But I would say it's still very interesting. Like, just be patient. It's very heavy on historical matters between indigenous and English people. But the dragon aspect is cute. The fact that they're students, it has It has the school, it has the academy, it has the kids, the brother, the multiple friends that she meets. And as I mentioned, IDN is where the action begins, and this is only book 1. So I would rate this 3.75 out of 5. Like I said, it was a lot of words, but in terms of the world building and the multiple characters and the time in which it was set, it had those fantastical elements. So for that, I'm giving it that rating. And the story was also interesting. I really liked the character Anakus. She was well spoken, she was outspoken. She did not just take all the criticism that were coming from the English people towards her people, because there was a lot of that. And that reminded me a lot about how white people saw black people. It's the same story how white people saw indigenous people. And when I was reading of how she was being talked to, spoken to, but like I said, it made for a good story. So 3.75 out of 5. Then I read The Lost Saints. Okay, so obviously in the second book, because if you recall, I already talked about the first book, and we left off at the priest was Joseph, and the girl, the Irish girl, he's a priest, and so in the second book, we follow their story. Now, y'all have to remember, this is a story of forbidden love. There's no such thing as a priest marrying, although in today's day and age, that's different, right? I've actually watched documentaries set in France where priests were now married, and they were continuing to do the priesthood thing. So Joseph in this story, from the beginning, like I said, from the beginning to like maybe this much, okay? And like I said, I've already shown to you guys the way the chapters are written. There's always a quote or an excerpt of a saying that was taken from a book or a Bible or something like that. So from the beginning of the book to like the middle, you follow the story of Joseph and Tessa, and it's them grappling with their desires, their carnal desires of wanting to consummate what was already building in the first book. And although things happen, oh my god, like half of it, something tragic happens. And I was like, I almost threw the book. I'm like, okay, well, I guess the story's done, but then there's this much, so why am I trying to read the rest? What? Anyways, let me read you some quotes, you guys, because essentially that's it. It's the love, the story between the priests. So here, you're colored here, he whispered. I am? What color are yours? They're brown. Okay. I guess this is the part where, so let me just tell you a little bit. That part happens when Tessa is wanting Joseph to basically remove his clothes, and Joseph doesn't want to because she's gonna see the brown part of his body. As you guys recall, he has African ancestry in him, right? Although the exterior that he usually shows is very white, some parts are brown. So anyways, let's see. Man, there's some things I was dying, y'all. Like there's this scene where they're like getting into it, right? So Tessa, she has to use the washroom, right? She goes to use the washroom, and obviously she takes care of herself. And now she comes back, and then they're getting into it, and then she's like, no, don't, like, no, really, like, don't, and like, don't, because he was trying to go down there, and she's like, no, don't. And then she says here, her face crinkled up in disgust. Joseph, you really don't have to. It must taste terrible. No, it wasn't dessert wine, but neither was it unpleasant. And she asked, is it like my saliva? A little. And then he's like, in order to taste her better, closer to lemonade, Joseph smiled. Not only do you look and smell like a rose, you taste like one too, or at least you taste like the Lamarck roses smell. So, y'all, I love this book because like the whole interaction between him and Tessa, the way they were speaking to each other, they were almost quoting biblical verses. You know how Solomon talks about, like, he has like this whole poetic speech about love, and he speaks about carnal desires, but in such a, like, it's subtle, you know what I mean? It's so subliminal. So that's how they were talking to each other. And there were some other things they were using, such as Shakespeare language and those other writers back then that were either writing about love but subliminally and things like that. And that's how they were speaking to each other, because you have to understand, he's a priest and he's trying to help Tessa, because Tessa is in love with him and he's in love with her, but he feels that as a priest he can't consummate the love, but he can do other things, hence the whole pleasing her a different way, not penetration. So anyways, I'm gonna stop there because, like I said, I don't want to give in too much if you have not read the first book, because you have to, right? And then in the second half of the book, there's another story that develops. So what happens is that Joseph had a sister. That sister, something happens to her in the first book, and there's a boy that's left. There's children from that. She was married. The sister was married, and she had, I think, 2 children. Actually, 3 children. There was a baby that was also born, but unfortunately, like I said, tragedy happens, and now these 3 kids are left alone. Where they're left is in an area close to the mountain that is near to indigenous people that are settling there. And that's how the other half of the story the author basically picks up from. She now tells you the story of indigenous people, of the kid, and that kid, his name is David. So he's Joseph's nephew. So as I mentioned, something happens to the family, so he's brought to Charleston to live with Joseph's parents, and that's where he grows up. He actually grows up in the household of Tessa, and he's aware of what's going on with Tessa and the priest, but he's cool about it, he's not judging. But what happens is that David had lied to the family of what had happened to his parents, and now he tells a story that is absolutely astonishingly heartbreaking. Remember, I said they were left alone because something happens to the parents. The baby, because there's no mom, there's no milk, that baby's like a month old, and he's left. David there, I think, is like 10 years old. His little sister is like 8, and they're with the baby outside by themselves. So he decides to make a decision. You guys, when I read that part, I was like, a part of me was like, they're children. What did you expect? But a part of me is like, that's inhumane. I'm gonna leave it out there. So anyways, and then something happens and we are introduced to this character. And this other character will grow up among indigenous people. And you meet. And what I enjoyed about the story is how the author spoke about the history of indigenous people and how she related the way the English settlers kept on coming and kept on coming and kept on coming and taking all these lands that belonged to the indigenous people, to the native people. Oh my God. I know of that story, but it's just the way she sort of wrote it. In this story, you just like, they took everything from these native people. They took their people, they brought diseases with them, they brought like guns in exchange for what? Oh my God. So I love that historical aspect of it in the other half, and as I mentioned about that character growing among indigenous people, right? So that said, that character has a relation with Joseph's family, and that is what we're gonna discover in the third book, y'all. Like, did I show you guys? Where is it? It's right here. I want to read it like right now. I almost wanted like throw all these books like and just start reading. I want to dive into this book, y'all. This is heavy, but you read these books so fast. Like, it's floppy, and even though the writing looks small, but you guys, I'm going through these books like this, so I'm excited. So y'all can tell, right? Native, stranger, y'all can tell it's gonna have the indigenous part to it, the continuity of the other half in this. I'm excited. Okay, I'm done. Okay. And lastly, I read Never Caught. Never Caught, the Washington's relentless pursuit of the runaway slave, Ona Judge. Yo, this book I finished yesterday, and it's exactly that story. what I wanted to say, I was like, yo, it's set in New York. New York, New York. Y'all know that song by Jay-Z and Alicia Keys? Every time she mentioned New York, I kept thinking about it. But then I was like, oh, but in the 1700s, 1600s, that New York wasn't like that. So essentially, it's the story of Ona Judge. She's half mixed. Half mixed? She's half. She's mixed. She's half black and half white. And funny thing is, the way the author talks about the parent is that both the mom and the white dad were enslaved on that estate of the Washington. So the Washington lived in Mount Vernon. And Mount Vernon, on that estate, I think it was it in Virginia? But they had over 200 slaves, the Washington, the first lady and the first mister, the president. And they had all those slaves. So imagine that they also had white slaves, but they were freer. They could do a lot more than their enslaved black people. So her story, she's born of that couple. What happened is that the day she decides to run away is the day that the first lady decides she wants to give her away to her granddaughter, who's getting married to this older guy who's English. They're American, the guy is English. So when Ona discovers that, she's absolutely beside herself because she served the family through and through. She was like the seamstress of the first lady. She was like her first, like she was there, like glued to the lady. When she discovered that she was gonna be just discarded like that, she decided to take that decision. Now, I want to read a couple of things to you guys just to make you understand the kind of reality that was happening, even though you already know, right? Bushy-haired with light skin and freckles, a young Ona probably spent some of her days playing with her siblings and other enslaved children in the quarters. More often than not, though, she had to learn how to fend for herself. Judge and the other children at Mount Vernon cried out in loneliness when their parents witnessed the brutality of whippings and corporal punishment, and fell victim to early death due to accidental fires and drowning. Childhood for enslaved girls and boys was fleeting and fraught with calamity. Many perished before reaching young adulthood. You can just imagine, because their parents were sent to the house. They were either house slaves or cornfield slaves, right? And these kids, it's not like you could hire a babysitter to be like, okay, could you keep my kids, or even a family member, because every adult had to be out there, working. So these children were left alone, and can you imagine? Absolutely terrible. So, I'm not done. So here, the story is about General Washington. He was in the army. Before he became president, he actually was in charge of a whole army. So listen to this. General Washington held the lives of more than 100,000 men in his hands. Men who had agreed to bear arms in the new Continental Army, white and black, by the way. Men who risked their limbs and lives in order to create a new country. More than 30,000 American soldiers perished in the war. 30,000. Many from direct combat and others from slow-moving disease and infection that ravaged makeshift infirmaries and camp hospitals. Unknown numbers of men died in the most dreadful ways: accidentally shot by comrades, crushed by old and unstable heavy wagons, falls from horses, and accidental drowning. So after all of that, he decides that he's gonna go and run for president. And there's this guy who's gonna be his secretary for the period that he's gonna be running for president, who comes with a letter on the horse and tells him, yes, you have been called to duty as the first president of the United States. So the things happen. He has to travel to Philadelphia, and there he is basically not crowned, but crowned or called into office, and there he will start his presidency. So what happens is that he has to move some of his family members from Mount Vernon to come to Philadelphia, but essentially establish himself in New York. That's where he's gonna be running for presidency. Also, I wanted to mention something, you guys. There's so much things that she talked about. She talked about African, like at some point during the same time in New York, Ona does discover that there are free blacks at that time, okay? And what the president and the first lady didn't want was their slave to associate themselves with the free blacks in order to actually start having ideas of freedom. Like, they did not already have it. So at some point, she mentions these group of New Yorkers who were ready to end the institution of slavery. These influential men had gathered together just a few years before to form the New York Manumission Society and began the difficult task of persuading New Yorkers to gradually release their slaves. But as you continue to read on, you will notice that New Yorkers were reluctant to abolish slavery. And she talks about the southern and the northern parts of the United States, how northerners felt that they were, I guess, nicer enslavers versus the southern ones, because that's where like punishment and cruelty happened, but they were kinder. So yeah, let me spare you. Oh, I wanted to talk about this part. This part really hurt me. In 1788, the year before George Washington's arrival in New York, black residents uncovered the dubious practice of white medical students. In need of cadavers for dissection and research, white students raided black graves, removing bodies for study and then leaving the remains in bags by the docks. New York, my. So black people were angry that not only you are absolutely dehumanized while being human still, and after death, your body has to be. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it there. Yo, this book was infuriating. Did I say that correctly? It was a lot. It was absolutely a lot. So one thing I wanted to mention. So Pennsylvanians wrestled with the moral dilemma of African slavery as early as the 17th century. So what happens here, she talks about how different religious groups started speaking against slavery, such as the Quakers. You all heard about the Quakers. They were really prominent in the move for abolishing slavery. There was also Methodist and other religious groups. So it says Pennsylvania slavery did enjoy a kinder reputation than did its southern neighbors. Nonetheless, slavery continued, and within the Society of Friends, a great debate over human bondage brewed for nearly a century. There's a part I want to mention. It was about the African schools. Of course, the Washington wanted to go around the law, because at some point where they were, I think it was it in Philadelphia or New York? So they wanted to go back to Virginia so that they didn't have to free their slaves. Both Lear, who's the secretary of the president, held fast to paternalistic assumptions about African slavery, believing that enslaved men and women were better off with a generous owner than emancipated and living independent lives. Jesus Christ. And here's the best part, when I was talking about how Northerners versus Southerners felt that one or the other was kinder. Many believed Northern freedom to be a far less humane existence, one that left black men and women to die in the streets from exposure and starvation. Let me find about that school, the African school. Okay. So here she talks about 3 years before Judge's arrival, a group of free blacks, including Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, came together to form the Free African Society. It was the first black mutual aid society in Philadelphia, and its goals were to help widows, the poor, and fugitive slaves who were unable to provide for themselves. So I like that. I like the fact that it was the first African school. Okay, guys, I'm gonna conclude because there's so much things she talked about. Like you guys, you need to read this book. It's full of important historical things that we need to know. So at some point she says in 1793 there's the yellow fever that took hold of, was it Philadelphia? Yeah, it was Philadelphia. And it was in 1793 the yellow fever happened, and close to 5,000 people perished from that disease alone, including blacks and whites. So why this thing is important is because, one, I felt nothing for these white enslavers, but I felt something for the blacks, because their lives was already arduous as it was, and for them to go through that, that's just a blow that when you think about God, you're like, okay, all right, so it was not enough that we're going through what we're going through, but you also had to throw the yellow fever. Okay, So anyways, what happened is that, remember that Richard Allen, who founded the African Society, he decided that through this period he was going to come to the help of the white people. How? By basically sending these black folks to go and help them in hospitals and stuff like that. But oh no, you know what happened? It was not gratitude that they received from those white people. It was not recognition that they received from those white people. It was not kindness that they received from those white people. Oh no. It was the opposite, if not cruelty. It was blame, insults. And at the same time, while he did that in order to show the white people that they could help, he sent his people to die by wanting to help white people in order to show them that they could work together. Okay. So anyways, like I said, guys, there are many things that this book talks about. So lastly, I want to present a picture to you guys. She talks about how Ona wanted to run away. But y'all know that running away as a slave during time presented so many risks, so many problems, so many obstacles. So Ona, who was I think like 20 something, needed to think about that. So let me just present a picture here. You're a young black girl, if you want mixed, okay? You're about to leave your family and what you've known your whole life to go into the unknown. Say it's not winter yet, but it's still summer. Wherever you're trying to run, you have no food, no appropriate attire, no shoes, and food, and bag to pack all of that. You really can't, because people around you will know that you're running away. So you sort of gotta just make a run for it with whatever you are. And however long it will take you, you know if winter comes, you're gonna die of hypothermia. Even if you survive one day, you have no food, you have no water, crossing the Delaware River. Just trying to imagine that. And I'm not done. So say it's not winter, you're able to run and it's still summer. You have heat strokes that you can suffer from, dehydration, mosquitoes, all of that stuff, and you're sleeping. There's mudslides. Yo, when I say the life of a runaway slave was fraught with obstacles, the way she described, I was like, oh my God, that's enough. That's enough. Like, I can't. I absolutely can't. And you think that's the end? No, y'all. No. Now imagine you cannot read. So where are you running? Where are you going? Which direction? You cannot read. On top of everything, all those black people were illiterate. I was dead. So today, y'all, I'm gonna conclude this. Today, if I hear or see anybody, whether Africans, African Americans, Caribbeans, want to talk so much thing about, a little bit like, what is it, Kanye, he said, 400 years, that looks like, he said that comment. I'm sorry. Today, you are where you are because your ancestors, where you come from, decided to do things that somehow, let's be honest, you and I will cower to do. So today, if people want to disrespect, say, in my descendants, blah, blah, stop. Let's remember that these people were real people who had feelings, who felt pain. And there was so much to lose, because even if you did run away, you left a family member or more family members there. And you know the repercussion, the punishment, if it was not gonna follow you, it was gonna befall your family members. So you also had to think about that before you ran away. And at the same time, while I mentioned all of that, you have slave catchers that are after you. My God. So I'm gonna be in front of you and be honest. I don't know which one I would have been. I don't know, y'all. I have no idea. I can't. Like, I look at my personality, and we know that our personalities, yes, there's some genes, there's all of that, there's culture, there's also the environment, that helps in making you who you are. I just told y'all, for me to die for my kids, there's really gotta be no other options above and beyond, Now imagine, you know that you're gonna die if you're caught, and the punishment can be cruel. We've heard of things, the punishment were so barbaric, and yet there are people who dared run away. And she talked about the percentage of men versus women who ran away. It was mostly men. and it was between the age, I think, of 16 and like 30 something, like before 40, that would attempt to run away. The women were less because we're mothers, y'all. We are mothers. You have children. And during that period, it is when you are rearing children. You are giving birth to children. That's when you are being raped. That's when you are stuck with children. So imagine you running away through mudslides, through the heat, through winter, with no shoes and kids in tow, babies, all of that. How are you gonna make it? You're not making far, and your baby needs to cry. You're gonna be hurt by those dogs, by those slave catchers. Ugh. Woo. Y'all can tell, right? I have goosebumps. Y'all can tell how this book affected me. No matter how many of these books I read, each story is always so unique. Always unique. Even though the things are the same, you guys, y'all can tell I enjoy this book. This book, it's a non-fiction story, obviously, and I wanted to show you a little bit of the images. This is New York. Okay. It's George Washington taking the presidential oath of office, Federal Hall, 1789. The first president of the United States. Let me show you the granddaughter. And by the way, this is the move to Philadelphia. I don't know if you can tell. The first lady lost all her children, so she only had the grandchildren who survived. So, like I said, God taketh and God giveth, right? That's all I'm gonna say. This is the first colored church, and it says the first colored church Methodist, the first colored Methodist church in Philadelphia. If you can see there, focus. Let me show you the granddaughter. There she is. So the reputation of this granddaughter was that she had an attitude. That's why Ona made that decision to run away, because she could not stand to be subservient to that granddaughter. So anyways, the rest, you guys, it's about her journey. Once she runs away, she crosses into Portsmouth. There you get to see about her life, her family, and how she persisted and how she remained uncaught by relentless pursuit by the president and his dogs. So that's the part I didn't tell you, but that's the part that you guys need to discover. All right, so anyways, you guys, I know I talked a lot. This is why I wanted to talk about this book in this video, so that in my wrap up, I wrap things up. Anyways, you guys, I hope you enjoy this video. Please don't forget to like, to comment, to share. I want to hear you guys. Yeah, you guys, I want to hear your thoughts about Never Caught. You know, like, can you try to imagine, just share something about that book, because that book really affected me. So anyways, you guys, I wanted to say, yeah, don't forget to like, to comment, to subscribe and share. I'll see you in my next video. Ciao.